Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Drop In. We start out this episode with the message that we're going to be talking about suicidality, which unfortunately can be a really taboo topic to talk about, especially in the American culture. There's a lot of topics under mental health that are heavily stigmatized and feel taboo, with suicidality feeling as if it's at the top of the list. We know about 50,000 U.S. Americans die each year from suicide, with 13 million people in the U.S. seriously considering ending their lives. Dr. Jackie, good to see you. Let's just start out with this question. What do you think the ripple effect is of suicide and having conversations about suicidality being so taboo?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the fact that people are feeling uncomfortable having those conversations or feel like they can't talk about some of these topics like suicidality, I think it isolates us even more. It prevents people from getting the help that they need and are looking for a lot of times. And I think it just really disconnects us even more from sharing our own conversations and our own experiences with this from other people that might be so helpful.
Absolutely. I completely agree, which is why we decided to start out this episode by sharing a bit about our own experiences, which is not something often mental health professionals do. Certainly some do, and I've seen it on social media. But again, of all the topics that we talk about under mental health, suicide seems to be the one that people avoid like the plague.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's talked about, it's very hush hush.
Yeah.
I know for me personally, the time I was the most suicidal was in the middle of my doctorate program.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't yet been diagnosed with OCD. I was being flooded with these harmful images in my brain. And there's a saying out there that I feel like fits so true, that often when people are considering dying by suicide, they don't necessarily want to end their life. They
Mm-hmm.
just want the pain to stop.
Yeah.
Nothing, when I think back about that time for me, nothing could be more true. I was flooded with these harmful images 24/7 from the moment I woke up, trying to go to class, trying to do some research. They were just always there. And if it wasn't for luckily having close friends that I first talked to about this, and I'm like, I feel so unsafe. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I cannot pivot my mind. I cannot focus on anything else. Like, I just feel like I've completely lost it.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for them being like, yeah, we need to get you connected with a therapist, you need to talk about this. Like, I often look back at that time, it was the most mental health pain I had been through. And again, just feeling so helpless and hopeless, which are common themes that we often hear when someone is dealing with suicidality.
Yeah. I can't even imagine you not having talked to friends about that because again, I think it's so hard for people to even start those conversations a lot of times. So the fact that you had the strength and the knowledge to go to someone and to talk about that, I think just again shows your strength and the resilience that you have. But I can't even imagine if you didn't feel like you could go to anyone.
Well, and I think about, like, I'm in the middle of a doctorate in psychology program.
Yeah.
And I went days like that. I went days feeling like I don't know what's going on, but I don't want to tell anybody about this.
Hmm.
And so I think about people who aren't in some sort of mental health field. Again, the layers of stigma and misinformation that can become layered and make you isolate even more. But that was the Kickstarter of just like telling my closest friend in the program of like, dude, I'm not okay.
Yeah. I think it takes so much strength to actually have that conversation and to bring that up to someone in your life.
Yet it's the most important thing
Agreed.
that I would tell anybody is like the isolation, the being stuck in your own mind with your own feelings. It's not accurate, which is the thing that when you speak about it to someone else, you feel that little bit of connection and relief, especially if it's anybody who
Hmm.
can like hold space, that you just feel this little sense of, okay, like in this moment, I'm here with you talking about this thing that I've just been bottling up.
Yeah. And it sounds like even just having that conversation with someone and letting someone into your experience was so transformative because it, one, opened the door to resources and actually getting you connected with the help that you were needing at the time. But just to be in the presence of someone else and having them know what it was that you were experiencing feels like you were able to feel safer than how you had been in your mind.
You get that glimmer of hope.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, we got a plan. Like, again, I can talk to someone about this. Like, it's just the smallest morsel of hope, which is often what we're looking for. And I know you've had experiences too with suicidality.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I don't talk about this often because I don't always feel like it's my story to tell. But when I was a freshman in college, one of my very close family members made a really serious attempt, and we knew what had happened. That person essentially was missing. And if I'm being real, I can't remember if it was a day, 2 days, 3 days, because my trauma has kind of like blocked out some of those like details. But we had known based off of context and things that were essentially missing out of the house what had happened. And it wasn't super shocking, which is kind of wild to say, because this person had really been not themselves for quite some time. So for me, it was such a transformative experience and such like a huge moment in my life because my immediate thought was like, I lost this person who I'm so close with. And it was the feeling that I always go back to is helplessness.
Yeah.
Like I felt so helpless. I didn't know how to help them leading up to that point, and I felt like I didn't know how to help them even after that. And I'm grateful that they were able to get the help that they needed. And part of that was, a hospitalization to manage like some of the immediate acute stuff that was going on for them. And then also a hospitalization, like an inpatient type hospitalization for several weeks after that. And then, continued treatment after. But thinking back to that time period again, like all I keep going back to is that feeling of helplessness and not knowing what to do for them or what not to do, right? What to say, what not to say. And this feeling of like walking on eggshells and not knowing how I can help. And the thing that I've realized now, after learning all of the things that we have, is knowledge is power. Knowing the things that I know now, I feel like I could have had those conversations, or I could have connected them with those resources earlier, or I could have just been a different kind of support and not been afraid to talk about those things at the time. And so hopefully in, us sharing our experiences and sharing this episode with people, we can open up the door for more people to have conversations about these things that are very real.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that because I know you had talked before to me before we started recording. You're like, I don't really feel like this is my story to tell. And I had the part of like, you're directly involved. You experienced this. And I think there's a lot of people out there like, of course, in my story, it's me, the one, with the feelings of suicidality. And in yours, it was a very close family member. But this is the nature of suicidality. You might not be the one who feel like I want this all to end. But again, it could be brother, sister, mom, dad, aunt, whoever. And it impacts all of us in sort of the ripple effect way. But you touched on a big misconception that certainly exists is if I bring up suicidality to someone I suspect, is having thoughts of suicide, will that increase their likelihood of dying by suicide or attempting?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest misconception that I hear when it comes to suicidality is that if I bring up suicidality, if I ask this person if they are suicidal, I will somehow plant that idea for them, or that they are more likely to do that because I had this conversation. And let me be the first to say this, that is absolutely untrue. If anything, it's the complete opposite, because a lot of times people don't know how to bring up those conversations, or they're afraid to bring up those conversations or have that discussion with someone, right? Kind of in your case too, where you had been sitting with that feeling for days and didn't say anything to anyone, didn't have those conversations. I'm sure part of that is I'm hoping that this passes, or I don't know how to bring this up, or I don't know who I can share this with, or, you know, just some of those barriers that we face. And bringing up that conversation to someone that you have concerns about actually opens the door for them to get help, and oftentimes makes them feel safer, even just having you there as a person.
Absolutely. It's so true. And again, and I understand that that information hasn't always been known publicly,
Mhm.
of like they worry, like if I bring this up, is that going to increase the likelihood? The answer is no, it won't. And in fact, research has shown it's more helpful. But that's on broaching these conversations. But when we zoom back just a little bit and we talk about what is suicidality, what comes to mind for you?
The first thing that comes to mind is how common suicidal thoughts actually are for people. Um, in being in a mental health field and working with so many people, you recognize how frequent this actually comes up for people, and that it's not a bad thing to have conversations about. It's something that, in having those conversations, a lot of times it alleviates some of the pressure that people are feeling, right? So when I think about suicidality in general, I think about the different spectrum and the continuum that suicidality falls on, right? So we have having thoughts, right? Some of those could be passive, right? Of, I don't really want to be here anymore. Or if I didn't wake up, I'd kind of be okay with that. Or I don't want to be experiencing this pain anymore.
Mhm.
So we have that end of the spectrum. But then, we have the different aspects of, okay, now I'm thinking about actually ending my life, or I'm starting to think about plans or ways that I can maybe carry this out if and when that feels like the time is coming, or those types of things. So there's definitely this broad continuum that suicidality falls on.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned sort of the passive thoughts versus more active, where people sort of can have intent to end
Mm-hmm.
their life. They have the means to end their life. They have a
Mm-hmm.
plan that's sort of imminent, that's upcoming. And that's sort of the most sort of active or heightened state. And then you have everything before that, which again doesn't get discussed enough, of the
Mm-hmm.
amount of people, especially you pick up a new client in therapy. I genuinely feel that the majority of people have had thoughts of ending their life.
Agreed.
And it could be because of what we just talked about, like this heightened trauma experience,
Mm-hmm.
this helplessness they feel at work,
Mm-hmm.
a relationship that they can't really see a way of it improving. It's not just depression.
Right.
Certainly can be a part of depression, can be a part of trauma, anxiety, can be a part of nearly anything mental health
Yeah.
related.
Or even physical health
Of
related,
course.
chronic pain, difficulties in terms of physical abilities. And there are just so many things that can bring up suicidal thoughts for people. And I think a lot of times we do often associate suicidal thinking just with depression. And that's absolutely not the case. That is one of those things that, again, being in the mental health field as long as we have at this point, you realize that it's not just tied to depression. There are so many other aspects, whether it be, again, physical conditions, systemic
Of course.
challenges, right? And just all of these difficulties that people experience, and it's not just one thing.
How do you talk about this in therapy?
Yeah.
This is just a common question we get asked. The perception is this, and it's not to say this hasn't happened to people. People are out there with this experience of they feel like they bring up to a therapist, mental health professional, or anybody that they're having thoughts of ending their life. And then it's like all of a sudden they're being placed on a 72-hour hold and they're in a hospital.
Yeah. I mean, even before we get to that question, in all of your years of doing this, how many times have you hospitalized someone?
Twice. 2 times.
Yeah. And in my experience, 10 plus years of doing this, I have hospitalized one person and it was absolutely not against their will. They willingly agreed to go.
And there's that layer. Is it involuntary? Is it
Right.
voluntary? There can be like the gray in this, and there can be the not, meaning
Right.
that this is so imminent, this sort of has to take place. But I appreciate you asking that question, because definitely we talked the other day of like, how many clients do you think you've seen over the course of 10 years? I'm like, easily over 1,000, easily.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not really even including groups or other settings. And yeah. And of course, this can come down to what setting do you work in? Worked in community mental health, private practice, university counseling centers.
Right.
And ironically, in all those settings, university counseling centers had the highest incident of.
Which isn't super surprising.
With the data that the majority of people will attend some sort of college or university in America at some point. I don't know how well that holds exactly in 2025, but it was certainly true in 2020.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's an interesting conversation to bring up even within the therapy space, right? I think a lot of people have this concern that if they bring up suicidality, they're immediately going to be hospitalized. And I've had this conversation with honestly so many of my clients who have that concern. And it really opens the door to have conversations about when that does happen, or all of the things that we can talk about to prevent that from happening if that is, such a huge concern. And I had this conversation actually recently with a client. And we really just talked through all of the instances that we can talk through and ways that we can prevent those types of things from happening. And the thing that I always tell my clients too, and maybe not everyone does this, but for me, I always tell my clients too that I want to have a conversation with you. You will never, ever have police just show up at your door without you knowing that first. I am someone who, if something is happening where we are at such an elevated risk, you will very much have a conversation with me where I will be telling you, I think this is a concern, and I think that maybe you need a higher level of care in this moment just to keep you safe. And these are the ways that either we can get you to that place of safety, whether that be, again, reducing access to means, whether that be calling a loved one or support to be with you during that time, whether that be if you need a ride to the hospital or if you need a ride somewhere, I will arrange that for you. But there's never a time that I am going to call 911 and have someone just show up where you are.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that needs to be said. I almost said, of course, but I think people out there need to hear that. I also think we need to have a real conversation about why does it exist? Why does a 72-hour hold and a hospitalization exist? Because there's all kinds of conversations of people on social media saying how horrible and bad it is. I'm not minimizing that at all. 0%. We know there can be a lot of variability on sort of hold hospital sites. And the reason being is, they tend to take away your phone and do some things that ensure your safety in the here and now. And again, it's about, I guess I'll just broach in and just say it. It's about extending the timeline. When there's imminent risk, you have a plan that is coming up soon. You have the means to follow through with that plan. You have the intent. You're going to do this. Anything we can do to extend this timeline, we have to do it.
Yeah.
And it's the right decision regardless of. And again, I certainly don't want to paint the picture that every 72-hour hold is the same and all people have the same experience. No. Like, I want that to be said.
Right.
Of, again, experiences vary, just like maybe you've been to a hospital at different times. Your different hospital experiences vary. It's just reality.
Right.
But why it exists is we have to extend this timeline.
Well, and again, even jumping off of that, a lot of times what is happening in the exact moment feels so heightened that you feel like you don't have a choice when it comes to actually carrying out that plan. So what we're trying to do in those situations with 72-hour holds is, again, like you're saying, extend that timeline, because your emotional state is likely to shift within a period of 72 hours.
Of course.
So the intensity of that feeling might reduce within that time period. The other piece of that is usually going to the hospital is the fastest way to get resources and to get either medication management or some sort of treatment that is the fastest acting treatment in that moment.
And more evaluation.
Correct.
And again, depending on where you're assessing this from, it's like you could be in private practice where it's you and them. And you're like, we need more people involved, for your care and your well-being.
Right. And more consistent support.
Right. Again, I start there because I know that's a lot of people's fears, and you're addressing it and saying, like, we're always going to have a conversation. We're always going to go into the nuance. We're always going to talk through at length why this is the best option, going forward. However, and this is the biggest however, the amount of times we have conversations about suicidality in therapy, it's like every day, every other day, like all the time.
Yeah.
And the imminent risk is nowhere near what we just described for a 72-hour hold. Nowhere near.
Right.
There's no immediate plan. There's no means to carry out that plan. And the intent isn't there.
Right.
I'm having thoughts of, like, I want to die. I want this to end. What if 10 years from now nothing changes and I don't want to be here anymore? Like, the range and diversity that suicidal thoughts come in is so vast.
Totally. And it's interesting because, thinking back to, my young college self going through that experience, right, with my family member, and where I'm at now, it's fascinating how now I have those conversations so frequently that it doesn't feel weird to me at all, right? Like, there are a lot of people that are like, oh God, I don't know how to like have this conversation or bring this up. And for me, I ask some of those questions so like matter of factly, because to me, I'm so used to having those conversations that it's not something alarming at this point anymore, right? Because again, those conversations for us in the mental health space are so normal,
right,
that it's not this like big deal that we're having these conversations. If anything, I feel better having those conversations with clients and knowing that they feel comfortable coming to me and talking to me about the thoughts that they're having. So again, I think being in this space and having the knowledge that we do, we're in, a really great position a lot of times to be that person that people can come to and can talk to about the thoughts that they're having that they're scared to talk to other people about.
And I think that's one of the first things we do as therapists is just normalize how common this is.
Yeah.
Normalize how common it is to have thoughts of like, again, sometimes I don't want to be here. Sometimes I want to deal with this. Sometimes I think about ending my life. It's common.
Yeah.
And just to know that, I think you already have like, we've come to the point where we can talk about anxiety all the time.
Right.
We come to the point where, again, in most cultures, we can talk about depression or trauma all the time. Suicidality, we got a ways to go. But within the therapy room, it's like, talk about it all the time.
Just as common.
Just as common.
Yeah.
To dive into like, oh yeah, when do those thoughts come up for you?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on when those thoughts come up? When was the last time you had those thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think they're connected to? Let's look at this. Just like we do with any other sort of symptom
Right.
that pops up. But again, I think the misconception out there is that as soon as someone brings up suicidality, our hand is like hovering over this imaginary alarm bell.
Right.
And the opposite is true. It's like it's a symptom that is connected to many other things that I want to look at. Is this a new experience you're having? Did this just start? Is this something that has sort of always been there for you?
Mm-hmm.
When did you first experience this?
Right. And it makes me think too, I used to do trainings with a lot of production when I was working with reality shows. And we would talk about warning signs. We would talk about ways to have certain conversations, whether it be about mental health, whether it be about suicide or any of those, topics. And suicidality was the topic that everyone had so many questions about and so many assumptions about. And I gave this, training, I can't even tell you how many times. And every single time I gave that training, that's where everyone had questions because those conversations felt so intimidating for people to have. And it's just something that made me realize how normalized it becomes for us. But again, it reminded me of my younger self that felt so helpless and felt like I don't know what to do. So maybe that might be helpful even to talk through some of the potential like warning signs or things to look out for of people in your own life or in your own circle, and maybe how to bring up some of those conversations. Because for me, that was so powerful to learn what some of those things were so that I could feel like I had some power in these situations and felt like I had some resources to use.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is withdrawing.
Mm-hmm.
Withdrawing into like they're not, logging on and playing the video game anymore. They're not, as active in the group text. They're not like time after time they're bailing on the plan to hang out. Mm-hmm. It's like you just see this withdrawing. And to me, that's a big flag going up. Hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
How are you doing over there?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, people can hide behind, I'm just really busy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot going on right now. Are you doing okay though?
Yeah.
Because you're not even active in the group chat anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the major like flags going up is when someone withdraws, or really when someone just isn't acting like themselves anymore.
You got to trust that instinct, right? And that's hard because that was actually the first thought that came to my mind. I'm like, okay, but how do we define that? But I'm with you of like, they're just not themselves. Whatever you know them as their baseline to be, like a little quieter, again, it's not always the direction of sort of depressive in that sense, but sometimes you can see an uptick.
Right. More impulsive. More reckless.
Yes. But
You know,
it's different than their baseline.
correct. And that is the thing that I really tried to tell people time and time again is if you know someone's normal baseline behaviors and you know how that person typically is, if you notice any significant shift that feels super different from what their baseline typically is, that's usually a pretty good time just to check in with them, um, and just have those conversations of like, hey, I notice these changes in you, and I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. And one of the other things that always stood out to me that people would ask during these trainings is, okay, but when do I then ask them, or how do I ask them if they're having suicidal thoughts? And again, that misconception comes up a lot of times
Right.
of, if I ask them, then I'm planting this idea or this seed for them. And again, I can't emphasize this enough that that is the complete opposite, right? A lot of times it's really helpful if people are having suicidal thoughts because then it opens that conversation up for them. And if someone's not having suicidal thoughts and you are asking them if they do, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be like, WTF, bro? Like, how dare you bring that up? They're going to be like, no, I'm good. Like, thanks for checking in on me, though. Like, really cool of you to actually ask me these things that you care about me enough to ask. Right. So, again, like, absolutely not. Like, you can bring up those conversations and you can ask the direct questions. Um, Usually a time that I will always ask very direct questions is if someone tells me that they're having dark thoughts. Usually that is a pretty vague way of saying that they're having some thoughts that feel distressing to them.
Right.
It might not necessarily be about suicide, but it might be something that, even in your story that you've shared, right, of having really distressing images or thoughts that pop up wasn't necessarily suicidal thoughts, but it was something that then led to some of those thoughts. So anytime someone tells me that they're having dark thoughts, that's usually a time that I'll say, okay, what kind of thoughts are you having? Are you having any thoughts of suicide? And again, having those direct conversations and actually using the word suicide is a good
Right.
thing because it's opening the door to those conversations and being able to actually get that person connected with the help that they are needing.
Right. I totally agree. And I think some other things that you can be on the lookout for is helplessness, hopelessness, pointlessness.
Mhm.
It comes out in jokes. It comes out in who the F cares. I don't even give a shit anymore. It comes out in all these subtle and not so subtle ways that someone just sort of feels like, what's the point?
Yeah.
And again, that you can brush that under the rug and be like, oh, it's politically, it's an intense time and people feel that way. I don't think that's a risk we want to take. I mean, and ask him like, I hear you joking a lot about like, who cares and all this. Like, how are you actually doing? Are you having thoughts of ending your life? You ever think about that? I think the thing that most often happens in that, if someone's not, the most often thing I hear is like, no, not right now,
Yeah.
which is always the interesting thing about how common these thoughts are. Is
Mhm.
people will be like, oh, no, not, I haven't been recently.
Yeah.
Last year I was. And then you get to, again, learn something about, this friend, this coworker, and
Yeah.
be more open within the dialogue of normalizing that these things happen. But the hopelessness, the helplessness, the pointlessness, again, another flag going up in the air of like, let's look behind this and
Mhm.
is there something else here?
Yeah, absolutely. And then at that point, if someone is sharing that they have suicidal thoughts or that they're, having difficulty in some way, then I think another feeling that comes up for people is like, oh shit, now what? Now what do I do? Right? And then there's the panic feeling of like, okay, so they told me this, and then what do I do with that information? Right? And so part of feeling like you have actual resources or know what to do in that next step is having resources or letting someone know, hey, would you mind if I like help get you connected with a therapist, or would you like me to help you get some support, or what is it that might help keep you safe in this moment? Because the other challenge a lot of times too is that it feels like then it's your responsibility to fix it for them.
Yeah. And again, I know not everyone might be open to this, but I'm more apt to be how can you be the greatest listener
Mm-hmm.
you've ever been in your life?
Right.
That's my challenge to anyone out there. You don't have to fix it.
Right.
But for this moment in your life, how can you ask questions and become the best version, the best listener you've ever been? Because if you can get somebody talking, oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you are. Yeah. How long has that been going on for you?
Yeah.
Of course, it's always great when someone can mix in, oh, I've been there before.
Mm-hmm.
Share your experience. Of course, if it's not authentic, don't make something up. But I think people minimize that of like, can you slip in some normalization?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I felt like that years ago. How long has that been going on for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think those conversations can be so connecting.
You're letting them get out this thing that they probably told no one.
Right.
And of course, it was very effective for me, but it is for most people
Yeah.
in that they haven't had a single person who just hears their pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with what you're saying of like, you can definitely slip in. Hey, you ever thought about talking to therapists or like getting connected with a professional? Of course, like I encourage you to,
Yeah.
but I think sometimes people just in the initial wave of like, oh, they told me they're having thoughts. I better immediately go to problem solving mode. Personally, I'm not a fan. I'm
Agreed.
like, can you be a human being?
Right.
Imagine they just told you that they're dealing with anxiety.
Mhm.
What might you ask?
Right.
Everything applies.
And that doesn't mean that you have to be their therapist by
No,
any means.
no.
It's just being a human with another human.
That's it. But that's it. And I think this is the unfortunate thing that happens with taboo situations. There's such a heightened reaction that you lose the humanness. And I think we lose opportunity of
Yeah, agreed.
just sink in and be curious and talk to them.
Mhm.
With being empowered by, if you gain nothing else from this, you opening that space up is decreasing their likelihood of something occurring that they might end their life.
Right. Even just having those conversations oftentimes provides so much relief for
Right.
people, and also opens the door to future conversations about those things with you, with other people. And having those conversations again is oftentimes the biggest barrier for people and the biggest isolation factor for people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts. And just being able to open the door to those conversations and open the door to expressing what they are going through is the biggest relief factor.
Absolutely. And again, it's in tossing out other avenues you can go, you can get curious about like, is there anything, that they feel connected to?
Mm-hmm.
Are there things that like, yeah, dude, you stopped coming to trivia. Why don't you come by? Like, we miss you. We miss seeing you at trivia. You want me to pick you up? Connection. Like, can you play a role in increasing someone's connection? Yeah, you're not logging on and playing, the video game with us anymore, or, whatever it might be. We haven't done a movie night in a while. You want to come through? Like, whatever it might be, can you play a role in increasing their connection?
Mm-hmm.
But I think sometimes people try to jump to the like sort of cognitive of like, well, think of the good stuff going on in your life. And I'm like, I wouldn't open that door if I were you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just think, again, it might be over your pay grade a bit, but also the wrong direction of like, can you scoop them up and can you go get some pizza?
Yeah.
can you increase their connection in your role that you have with them?
Right. And I think a lot of times people kind of go that route to remind people of, like, reasons not to do that, which
Right,
I
right,
can
right.
understand.
Right, right, right.
And oftentimes it is more about being a human, again, with another human and normalizing that experience and opening the door to just more conversations and more connecting activities and ways that, yeah, you can be a part of connecting them, or you can be a safe place for them to go or to talk to if and when they want to have future conversations. So, again, biggest things are always having the conversations, being a human with another human, and just actually giving people space to express some of those things that they might be feeling and normalizing that for them.
Absolutely. And to sort of like shine some light on some of the things we do therapeutically, like
Mhm,
as professionals, shifting a little bit, it's like, yeah, often we will create things like safety plans.
mhm,
We'll have conversations that might reduce means or
mhm.
access,
Right,
but we get them in a position of sort of plotting out, if you leave here and you feel this type of way, what can we do that's helpful?
right.
What can we do to sort of pivot?
Mhm.
And those are really important steps to go through with a professional
Yeah,
to sort of outline access, no numbers you can call, crisis lines, but also have a mental plan to sort of carry you ahead, whether it's the next few days or week or whatever, of
mhm.
where's our energy going.
Right. And a lot of times it is using certain coping tools in those moments because, again, this is a really common thing for people to experience. This isn't something that, is always this immediate 911 type of situation. A
No.
lot of times it's, okay, this is a symptom of something bigger. And when we see this symptom coming up, okay, that's something for us to either use some coping tools in those moments, or that's something just for us to kind of keep on the radar and notice what usually is happening right before that, or what's happening, in the buildup of these symptoms kind of reemerging, and having those conversations and kind of getting curious about what that looks like for each individual person. So a lot of those discussions are what happen in therapy sessions. So if anyone is ever curious about, what do I bring up, or how is this going to look in a therapy session if I'm talking about thoughts that I'm having? That's usually what we're talking about. We're really looking at what intensity and severity the thoughts are, and, kind of like we were talking about some of the means or plans or access or intent behind some of those things, but also what you can do in the moments to really allow space for those thoughts, but also to feel like you have power in pivoting from those if and when they feel too uncomfortable. So, having a plan in place, having some of these tools at the ready so that you feel more empowered in those moments is also the important piece that we talk about in therapy.
And some of those tools just like really gloss over. Some of them are about regulation.
Mhm.
They're about grounding. They're about emotional expression, depending on the circumstance. They're about connecting with someone. They're about using their own hierarchy of things that they enjoy, even if they're not enjoying them right now. Like, are we taking your dog for walks? Are we connecting with your friends, at the gym or whatever it might be?
Mhm.
But it's really in your knowledge of knowing a person and again working on things that we know help with regulation, because it's about extending the timeline
Yeah.
is really what the core of it is. And that's what we would tell anybody out there. It's like every moment is a moment where you can feel slightly different.
Mhm.
And I literally say the word different because it's like things are always shifting and changing. But when you're isolated, you're alone, you're withdrawn, you're not connecting with people, and
Mhm.
you're not really varying up where you are. We talked about the power of the visual cortex system here. It's like you're not really leaving the house or the apartment or whatever. Any little thing that you can do can create a big difference in sort of changing our emotions, changing our thoughts. And again, everything's a process and a journey in itself, but we're trying to extend it. Hey, we got a lot of great listener questions this episode. We're always excited to see those come in from really all over the place, literally across the world. Annika over in Russia. If someone told you they have too much suicidal thoughts, but they don't want to talk about it, how do you approach them?
That's a good question. You want to start it?
Yeah, I've experienced this a lot, especially when you work in private practice. Is a little interesting because you get people who are motivated to come in. They're selecting to come in. And when you work sort of in community mental health or university counseling centers, people can be coming in, not that it's mandated, but they're coming in for sort of different reasons. And so the motivation can sort of be shifting a little bit of like, I'm getting really bad grades and might get kicked out of school. And so I figure I should talk to someone. And then behind that is sort of like, in asking the questions, you're like, I don't really feel comfortable talking about that. Especially when you first have an intake with someone, you're meeting with someone for the first time. It's common for a therapist, counselor, psychologist to ask you, like, are you having thoughts of suicide? Do you have any plan, intent, means right now? It's common to talk about that. But in the times when someone's like, I don't really want to feel comfortable talking about that, my go-to is to normalize the shit out of that.
Yeah.
I get it. You just met me. We might not even know each other that well. Or even if we have, in the circumstance where like, oh, I've met with you 8 times now. We've spent 8 hours in this sort of process together. I've been like, I can understand that there's a lot of things in mental health that still have, unfortunately, a lot of stigma around them. But I say it's common for most people at some point throughout their lifetime to have some sort of thought of ending their life. And so I want you to know that. And I also, if it's helpful for you, we can kind of go through thresholds of what it would look like if you needed a higher level of care in a moment and everything that falls sort of under that.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's interesting when I've had those conversations, the most often it's people not wanting to talk through that because of usually the fear of what might happen.
Right.
For example, like being hospitalized or something to that effect. So usually that opens the door for more conversations of what that process looks like, or, these are normal conversations that we can have, and that isn't like the end game for us. That's not what we are motivated by. But again, really normalizing that, this is not something that we often feel comfortable talking about, and that it is so common. So a lot of times it is exploring what is behind that discomfort for them or that fear for them. But also giving them this feeling of empowerment of like, and this is also your time, and we can use that in what ways are helpful for you.
And it's so interesting when you like sink into like all that nuance of just the normalization, and you realize for so many people, it's like they've never had anything close to this conversation.
Right.
They've never had someone looking across from them and be like, it is normal and common that at some point someone's gonna have a thought of like, oh, would it be better if I wasn't here?
Yeah.
And that people can be like alarmed by that. But again, when you talk to enough people will be like, yeah, actually there was a period of time where I thought that or wondered that.
Yeah.
And again, that's where you get into the vast variability of people's experiences with, suicidal ideation, or again, having intent, plan, or means. It's just such a vast ocean of a landscape, but isn't talked about in that way. This one was really great. The name they put, Freud's Worst Nightmare. I love that.
Love it.
And they said they're from Yolo County, California. And they said, yes, it's a real place. Now I need to know where have you ever heard of Yolo County, California? I haven't.
real thing.
It makes me like, I assume Southern California. Like, I assume, like, a little, like, yellow.
Oh,
Maybe
yellow
I'm
vibe.
wrong. Gosh, I love both NorCal and SoCal for very different reasons, but they're incredible places. Um, as a mental health professional, how do you reconcile your personal commitment to patient dignity with the reality that the broader system has often approached high-risk suicidal patients in coercive or dehumanizing ways? Thanks. Really appreciate the time and care you put in this pod. Yo, what a great question.
Yeah.
Really, and really getting into the historical way of like, we've come a long way. We got a long way to go in this mental health field, but in the ways people would be treated if, you know, even like maybe 20, 30 years ago,
Yeah.
if you talked about having thoughts of ending your life. And that's why these conversations are so important.
Mhm.
And bridging off of, the last question a lot, I don't take for granted normalizing it
Mhm.
with anyone when these
Right.
conversations come up. But it's not hard for me to be like really curious with a person.
Mhm.
Like as soon as somebody tells me a symptom they're having, I'm interested.
Yeah.
Oh, did this just pop up?
Mhm.
How do you feel about this? Does it bother you? Is
Yeah.
it something you notice all day, every day? Is it just at night? Again, my curiosity, because the the human experience is just so vast and
Yeah.
variable and diverse. Like it's just easy to sort of sink in and get curious and sort of model and show someone it's okay to talk about this.
Mhm.
And in fact, it's the way we're going to grow through it and understand ourselves better.
Right. And I think another piece of this too is especially for people who do have concerns about having these conversations with a therapist or about, their own autonomy in terms of that, making sure that you feel comfortable with the therapist that you are seeking out, right? So having those conversations on the front end, most of the time we have like a free consult call for like 10 or 15 minutes.
Absolutely.
And you can ask a lot of these questions on the front end of, what is, how do you handle certain situations like this? Or what is your, way of navigating or talking about this topic. And most of the time you'll kind of get your answer of how comfortable you feel with that person on the front end. And these can be things that again you explore and just have conversations. And I've had those conversations with my own clients where they'll ask me, I saw this thing on TikTok about going on a grippy sock vacation the second you like say X, Y, or Z in therapy. And I'm curious about, what those, lines are that have to be crossed or not crossed and what that looks like. And I love those conversations. I always welcome those conversations because it's, again, another opportunity to really normalize and to talk through ways that we can still have you feel autonomous and like you're in control of your treatment and not feel like your autonomy is taken away from you and in those ways.
It's gaining insight, understanding, and always having compassion for.
Mhm.
And in the examples where we talked about the two times where, again, a client I was working with, the best route in that moment was going to the hospital. I am as confident as I can be in knowing those follow-ups that there was a great deal of insight gained.
Mhm.
And it was there, and that was my whole goal, to make sure it was there on the front end.
Right.
Not, this is what's happening right now, we're going here. It's like, let's really unpack sort of what's led to this,
Mhm.
what we're experiencing right now, and why this is the best mode for the moment, and what's going to happen after.
Right.
And like sort of laying out this full timeline. I think that's when you again get to treating people with dignity, respect. And if it's not a moment where someone can grow through and from, what are we doing?
Right.
Like what? No, but what actually are we doing? If you can't, as a psychologist, therapist, outline this, explain this, and help somebody sort of gain insight into understanding of what has led to this,
Mhm.
that I really don't know what is the point of any intervention.
Right.
So again, I think I put that onus on me as a mental health professional
Yep.
of like, I'm going to break this down and make this as clear, and we're going to have a dialogue and get curious about it together.
In this collaborative way. Like, this isn't a me decision that I'm making over your life. Let's have this conversation together collaboratively to decide what is the best course of action to keep you safe.
Absolutely. And again, I think that gets at the heart of what the great question was asking about, like, humanity, dignity, respect. It's like, yeah, you model that.
Right.
You definitely have to
Yeah.
and should. We don't always like shoulds in the field, but damn it, you should. Hey, Stevie out there in Seattle, Washington. I feel like it's pretty common to have SI. And I feel like sometimes people look at me like I'm nuts when I talk about it. Is it less common than I think? No. People assume if you're smiling and joke, you can't be sad and have, quote, bad thoughts. I don't know. It makes me feel weird and not normal. I really like the nuance that you're asking in here, Stevie, of like, if someone's joking around
Mm-hmm.
and, seemingly projecting out like, happy joke, haha,
Mm-hmm.
can they be suicidal?
1000%.
Yeah, there's an interesting statistics out there of like how prevalent this is in comedians.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, we can talk about, of course, many famous comedians who have died by suicide. That's why I try not to talk about this stereotype of like, you'll see someone being really sad.
Mm-hmm.
It may be, you might see that. I don't want to say that isn't necessarily the
Sure.
truth, but other people it's this joking around.
Mm-hmm.
It's joking around about who gives a shit, like really pointless or whatever. We do not know how anybody's masking in a moment.
Right.
Again, you hear it in the things people joke about and you can hear it in there, but that's why it's important not to assume of like suicidality only has one face and it's sad and depressed in a classic sense.
Mm-hmm.
Not the case.
Right. Yeah. And I can think about even in my own life, I've lost friends to suicide. And the friends that I think about that I lost were those people that were joking, always had a happy face on, always like the life of the party. And again, I think it just goes to, again, normalize the fact that anyone can be experiencing this. And most of the time, if I encounter anyone who says that they have never had a suicidal thought ever in their life, I'm a little curious about that because it is such a common occurrence. So you are very much not weird or nuts for having suicidal thoughts and talking about that and you know being a very multifaceted human who can be social or joke around. This is a very normal, common presentation that we see as well. And again, I think it goes back to not assuming that suicidal thoughts only have one face or one look or anything like that, right? And why it is so important to have these conversations and to normalize having suicidal thoughts. Because again, a lot of times we don't even think about the people who are the center of attention or the people who are joking around or saying, just funny things. And just having those conversations and being a safe person to have those conversations with, I think is truly so important.
Absolutely. And if we were going to put sort of an interpersonal theory lens of like why those two things could sort of go together, like someone can be like joking around. I think joking around and the laughing defense is like one of the most common defenses.
Yeah.
because it's really pro-social. People like it. Oh, I love it that this person makes me laugh, and people learn that. What a great way to deflect and defend from how you actually feel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of a sort of better, I'm putting that word in quotes, defense.
Yeah.
If I keep you laughing and joking and we're having a good time, it's going to take a lot for you to sort of get to me
Mm-hmm.
and see. And I'm saying this from someone who had many chapters in my life. That was my number one defense. So the call is coming from the inside the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's why I did it. If I can keep you laughing and joke, you don't have to know the pain going on inside of me.
Right.
Common.
Super common.
Hey, Stephanie, also out there in California, fellow mental health professional. We always love when
Love that.
from our colleagues writing in. LCSW here, working with adolescents in a school setting. SI is a very common occurrence. A majority of the kids I work with struggle with SI, whether it's passive or having means, intent, or plans. I struggle. The struggle I experience is that SI is their main coping strategy. So I won't go too in depth here. We talked about this real quick before we started recording. I've never thought of SI as a coping strategy. I think it's a psychological experience people are having. I think self-harm can be a coping strategy, which we're going to have to do a whole episode on self-harm. Self-harm and suicidality are not the same. Someone can be having self-harm, behaviors and not have suicidality. Someone can have suicidality and have no self-harm. They're not the same thing. Can they correlate or co-occur? Of course they can. But the assumption is that they're the same. They're not the same. And if you talk to people, who are self-harming, again, you would see that. You're like, oh, this doesn't always relate to suicidality, though. This could be a coping strategy. Again, we're going to do a whole episode on self-harm. Stay tuned. But not to wordsmith you there, but like I've never have you thought of SI as a coping strategy?
No, and I'm wondering if, the thought of having an out is kind of the way that they're phrasing that.
This is just the reality of text-based questions.
Yeah.
Not your fault at all out there, Stephanie. It's not about you. It's just
Keep going.
Well, I'll keep reading. But it's true. Like when you read text, you're often like, "Oh, what do you mean by that?"
Yeah.
But like,
I need more. I need more info.
But you go on to say it's their go-to. Replacing that coping strategy with a more helpful and adaptive one is incredibly difficult. So how do you balance a client who's continuously having SI and knowing when to call a crisis line versus managing with a safety plan and building coping skills? How do you grow that threshold as a clinician? Love to hear your perspective. With all things in our field, you grow with experience, period. Like there's just nothing sort of sexy about that. You gain experience, of course, doing trainings and, sort of things of that nature. But to me, I wouldn't know. And again, I don't know the limitations in the school setting you work in. There's that factor. Right. How long do you get to be face to face with these kids? How much time do you have? But in my mind, I don't know why a sort of safety plan and talking about coping strategies isn't always on the table. Yeah. No matter what.
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting. Like I think back to my first placements and when I first started working with clients, and I remember that feeling of being intimidated, having those conversations and assessing and making sure that I was assessing to the fullest extent and doing all of the things that I could do. And now it feels so second nature to do that,
right,
that it doesn't even feel like a heightened conversation at all. To me, it feels so how was your day, basically, is the same kind of feeling that I have with oh yeah, how have your suicidal thoughts been? Tell me about the most recent. It has the same feeling to me because I've done it so many times. And I think that's, again, talking about having the experiences and doing this so frequently and having those conversations so frequently. that it does kind of balance out, I guess, in that way, that it doesn't feel as heightened. But I agree. I think there's always a space for having a safety plan, having tools and resources at their disposal, especially in kids, because kids tend to be more impulsive and prefrontal cortex is not fully developed just yet. So impulsivity can be, a bigger challenge with younger kids. So I think it's always helpful to have tools in place and a plan in place in terms of, if these things start to escalate or if I start to experience this more often or it becomes heightened, these are the resources that I can use or these are the tools that I can engage with.
Who am I calling? Who am I texting? Who am I talking to? Just to get into like,
Right.
what are you actually, what are the tools? What are the resources?
Yeah.
This is the person I'm going to talk to. I'm going to tell my mom. I'm going to text this, number line, whatever it might be.
Exactly. And even having some coping tools, right? Sometimes, you can even look up DBT tools to use in those moments so that, again, we're passing time to hopefully reduce that intensity of the thoughts or of the impulses. But again, I agree. I think there is always a time and always a use for a safety plan to have some of those things outlined when in those heightened emotional states, we might not always be thinking of the immediate, what can I do or what resources do I have? So I think that's super helpful.
I also think, and I don't know if there's room for this, but of course, getting to like, what is the core of this for this individual? Because we hope in this episode that you could see, or like that the nuance of that is really important. Like, I don't know how much time you have to like get into sort of the psychotherapy of like, where is this coming from for you? When do you feel this way?
Right.
Is someone dealing with depressive episodes? Is this related to their trauma? Is this sort of an impulsive thing, that is pointing in another direction? Because I think if you can sort of get to the core of things, there's more paths that open up like, oh, what do we do sort of from here? I also think spending some time and energy of like exploring and experimenting with what is meaningful for them. I think kids need to sort of be reminded of that. Like, yeah, sometimes as we cope and grow through life, we need to experiment of like, what does give us a little bit of excitement? What do you look forward to? Is there anything in your week that you like or look forward to or enjoy? Of course, again, I'm throwing a lot of things out there, but I also think of like, how can I get this kid connected? Knowing isolation, disconnection, one of the biggest variables for mental health to decline, period.
Yeah.
That's something I think about a lot. But if someone's constantly sort of pivoting to this, to me, it's again gaining good conceptualization as to why for this particular kid. And then I think it's what you meant with like a crisis line kind of scenario is like, I would certainly assess how imminent this is.
Right.
Is this just something like looping through their mind? They don't really have any intent. There's no plans. Maybe they don't even really have the means of like an exact plan, or there's no exact plan to sort of look at means. I think in that sense, then you can sort of just explore sort of the source of the thoughts. But when things escalate, it's so imminent. They have the plan in place and the plan is coming up pretty soon. They have the means to do this. They're telling you they're going to do this. That's when, of course, that we go to higher level interventions.
Yeah.
And I know there can also be a lot of variability within school systems and reporting lines and all those things that can vary greatly depending on your county, your state, and all that. But we hope we at least can normalize that it doesn't matter what age you are, at what point you are in life, that this could be a common thing that comes up. The fact that they're talking to you about it feels like a big win in itself. You're doing a good job forming a relationship where they can at least talk about it openly. Thank you so much, as always, for being here and all the different conversations we have here on Drop In. We love your questions. Again, we got a guest episode coming up here real soon, but We love a rate, a comment, a review, a share. It helps our podcast out a lot, and we really appreciate it. But we'll see you right here next time on Drop In.
Bye.
Peace.